Hi. Hey, Anna. Good to see you.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Kate.
Hey, everyone. All right. We're piling on into the room. We'll get started in just a minute. So as we're getting settled, as we're getting ready, I would love to hear in the chat. Your level of experience with wild edible plants. So stuff you're not buying in the grocery store, just like beginner, intermediate, advanced, and any other notes that you want to give me. And the reason I'm asking is I know we're going to have a huge variety of people here with different levels of experience. And I just like to know what your level of experience is so I can speak more accurately. Okay, cool. So we've got tons of beginners. Fantastic. Some intermediates. Super basic, but hang out with those who are more advanced. Go, Kathy. I hear you there. And then I'd also like to know, so again, if you're just joining, I'm asking in the chat. I'm Kate. We haven't gotten started yet. We're just kind of rambling. I'm wondering your level of experience with wild edible plants on the beginner, intermediate, or advanced level. And then I also want to know what do you want to get out of this hour that we're together? Like what if you leave, you're like, I learned what I wanted to learn. What's one thing that you're like, I would know this, or I'd be able to do that? Got some, yeah, got a few beginners, intermediates. Okay, dandelion medicine, how to identify plants and eat them. When to use what, nutritional benefits. How to practically use what is readily available. Yeah, good. Wondering what to eat in the woods, what's in your backyard. Yeah, what to do, how to clarify, classify. Great. Preservation, how to preserve stuff you're harvesting. What's good for allergies. Good. Preparations. Yeah, I'll go into allergies and environment and ecosystem a bit. Again, if you're just joining in, we're just typing in the chat. I just want to know your level of experience. So I want to teach to everybody, but I want to focus on where most of us are at. And it seems like we're in the beginner, intermediate category. And then I also want to know specifically how I could be useful to you. Have a good overview, how to harvest without harming the plant. These are great. Eat more out of my sparse landscape. Okay, good. Flora, you have no experience? Really? All right. Whether or not cooking is necessary for certain plants. Okay, well that gives us quite a bit to go on. Welcome everyone. My name's Cate Stillman, if we haven't already met. I see a lot of familiar faces, but I know some of us are brand new to each other. So welcome. I'm glad that I've been doing these like monthly talks to be able to get to know people that aren't necessarily in our courses and our courses where I do get to know you more. So if this is our first time meeting, yay, I'm glad it's around plants. I brought a few books. I brought a few of my favorite plant books. This is The Wisdom of Wild Weeds by Katrina Blair. This was my very first plant book, which is why it's kind of, you know a book is loved when it's like falling apart. It's got paper stuck in it. It's a little bit rough around the edges. Discovering Wild Plants. These aren't books like this one isn't necessarily one I'd recommend. It's more particular to my ecosystem, but it was my first plant book, so I had to share from the origin. This is one of my favorite books that I don't think it's in print. It's called Foraging and Feasting. And I'm not sure if you can manage people. Let's see. I think I can mute someone. There we go. Okay, good. So this one is Foraging and Feasting, which is by Dina Falcone. These books, there's so many more books out on wild plants than ever. What I love about this one is it shows the plants in all the different phases, and you start to tap into some of the plant magic. There's also these indexes of culinary use. A lot of the books that I've read over the years have had to do with Native American medicine and what Native Americans were using in this country that I've grown up in. And I really do suggest, no matter what country you're joining us for, that you know some of the native indigenous medicines and medicinal plants and how your ecosystem was really was being interacted with human beings, being nurtured and being loved as well as being utilized. All right, so you guys ready? Yes, we're ready, which means I'm gonna go to my, I'll go to my slideshow. I might bounce back and forth between my slides and my pad because I do want to draw out a little bit about plants and the permaculture plants and what that's all about, like what's kind of going on with our global ecosystem today. So I want to tie that in. For those who don't know me, I'm Cate. I've been hanging out here at yogahealer.com for 20 years. Back before domains were popular, I got the domain yogahealer.com, and I was coming into this world of humans and consciousness and the planet from a place of very deep ecological concern. So my background before going into helping people heal themselves was really in helping people heal the planet. So my background was in global environmental politics and policy. And from there, I decided that I wanted to raise human consciousness, figuring that as humans took better care of themselves, they take better care of their ecosystems. So this conversation about plants is it's an old conversation for me, but it's also near and dear to, I'd say, my evolving conversation as I'm discovering more and more every day, I would say, about my ecosystem and that, basically we're surrounded by nourishment and we're surrounded by medicine. So that's a bit of what I hope to share with us. And one of the core lessons that you'll hear kind of sprinkled throughout is that you're intimately connected with your ecosystem. We're going to learn more about how to do that specifically today, but you're already connected with your ecosystem, with the sky above you and the earth beneath you and the trees around you. There's also, I think, a core message that I've learned over time that as you become more connected to your ecosystem, you can become a better caretaker of your ecosystem. Just as you become more connected to your own body, you end up taking better care of your body. And so we're gonna look at that as well and what that might start to look like for you. And those are really my personal goals for why I picked this topic for us to talk about. We're gonna talk a little bit about invasive weeds. This is a quote from Emerson in a journal he wrote in 1927. And he was saying, what is a weed? A plant whose virtues have not yet been discovered. So we're going to talk today not just about the native plants that are edible and medicinal and might be even more popular. There's a lot of like popular plants. Some popular plants, popular medicinals have been over-harvested and are actually, have gone into endangered species lists over time. I think people in North America are familiar with the saga of golden seal. When golden seal was discovered, I think in the 1980s, it was massively over-harvested and it's a root. And this kind of comes to that question in our chat of like how to harvest something sustainably is a really good question. So sometimes plants are popular. All of a sudden they're this new superfood and they're famous, and then they get over harvested and then they go into depletion. This is happening with a lot of Ayurvedic herbal plants in India that are being over harvested for export. My goal with all of us is to get us actually much more in tune with the weeds. The weeds that are, they're invasive, meaning there's way more of them than we seem to be able to control, and how these are actually the new hip superfoods. So that's part of my goal for us today, is to actually focus on some of the invasives first. So those are going to be most of the plants that I talk about are the edible superfood, nutrient dense invasives. And I'll also want to impact some of the language. So if I say a word and you're like, what does that mean? Let me know. And I'll unpack that, because otherwise I'll probably use way too many words that are undefined. Okay, so this is I hate disclaimers. I don't know about you guys, because I feel like disclaimers are a way of not taking responsibility for the information that I'm going to share. I'm going to be like, I'm going to share all this information, but don't believe anything I or anybody else tells you about wild edible plants, right? And there's, don't eat plants that you see in a book or on the internet. I'm going to show you we're on the internet now. I'm going to show you a whole bunch of plants and how to use them. Get qualified instruction around plants. I'll just say this right off the bat. Like when I was starting, I grew up in suburbia. I knew nothing about plants. I had allergies, I had constipation, I had migraines, I had all these health issues kid and as a young adult. And it wasn't until I got really curious about my ecosystem. Like I got really curious about what was growing around me that I started to learn about the wild edibles. And at that point, I had already graduated from Ayurveda college and I'd already studied herbology fairly significantly, but I was studying plants in books. I was studying plants that I was ordering on the internet and were coming out of bags that were harvested in other countries. And that is sad for me personally. It's a kind of a, you know how some parts of your own personal history you might be less proud of? I'm less proud of that part of my history. And I could blame certain things like Ayurveda colleges and this and that. But at the end of the day, it was my own disconnect from my ecosystem, which was a huge part of why I had allergies to begin with. I didn't understand my body and I didn't understand the connection between food and ecosystem in my body. So one of the easiest ways, like in terms of this don't be foolish disclaimer, one of the easiest ways to actually find out more is to find out who knows more in your ecosystem. Even in New York City and in London, there's wild plant walks. If you just Google London plant walk, like you'll see that there's people that are taking people through public gardens and places in London and showing them what foods are edible and how to identify plants. And to me, that's super exciting. The botanists are generally, I would say, under-recognized population or profession. So what I did when I started to want to really learn what was growing around me is I asked everybody if they knew a local botanist. A botanist is someone who can identify plants. And they know what to look for. They know the language of plant identification, meaning that they know how to like look at a leaf and describe what's going on with the striations in a leaf in order to find out what kind of plant that leaf belongs to and what they might not know whether it's edible. They might not know whether it's medicinal, but they'll be able to identify plants. And what I found early in my discoveries of working with botanists is as I often knew more about the medicinal and nutritional value of the plants, and they knew how to identify what was in my ecosystem. And that was a really perfect marriage. So then I started to, at my yoga studio, I started to like bring people together with a botanist and I'd have a list of, okay, we're looking to find this plant. And the botanist would be like, okay, and we'd go look around and we would find that plant. And to me, that was really, you know, if there's not like someone doing edible plant walks in your ecosystem, just be the person who gets that going. It's honestly as simple as like asking around. You can ask you know, various people that work in county and government. Often there's botanists that are around to help understand ecosystem. Okay, so are we good on disclaimer? No one's gonna sue me for talking about plants and what plants can do for your body. All right, sorry to be silly about that. So to me, humans and plants, so plants are a lot older than humans, exponentially older than humans. So they're much more into survival. Like they've survived on this planet a lot longer than humans have. And to me, it's a bit fascinating to understand that I can't remember the exact stat on it, but it's something like actually, I don't even know, but it's like to the tune of billions of years, long time, right? That we have plants. No, I might not be saying that right. Maybe it's hundreds of millions of years. It's a really long time that we've had more plants than. And so we can learn from them as survival techniques. And, you know, a lot of people, when they talk about like doomsday and the end of the human race, it's like what'll survive, even like the worst, like nuclear attack, is the plants. Like plants will figure out a way to adapt and survive. And so we can learn from them. We can learn from their wisdom and their adaptability and where they're showing up now. And to me, this really plays into part with the invasives, because as we start to look at plants like this one, this is one of my favorite. This is thistle. This is another picture of thistle. I have a few pictures of thistle. I coined a saying a few years ago, I think it was over a decade ago, that thistle is the new dandelion. Those of you who've been around Yogahealer for a while know that I coined a phrase, dandelion is the new kale, when I was trying to get people into like the very introductory part of like, hey, there's things growing outside your door that you can eat. So why is thistle the new dandelion? Oh, Kim's got her t-shirt on. Kim, stand up again. Yay. Oh my gosh, I love it. Way to be on brand. So thistle, I think thistle epitomizes a plant with a bad rap. And the reason thistle has a bad rap is it's not, you know, and you guys have probably met someone like thistle. So again, know thy neighbors. Plants have personalities. Plants tell you a lot about themselves if you get to know them. And the more you get to know plants, the more friends you have. Like literally, you'll start to be like, you know, I had this friend the other day who's like, I do better with friends as dogs. And I'm like, I understand that, you know, like dogs are very forgiving. Dogs are always happy to see you. Dogs don't complain. Like there's a lot of reasons that you might have that. Well, plants are the same way. And as you get to know the personality of plants, you start to become much more part of a neighborhood. You become much more interconnected and part of an ecosystem. So you take a plant like thistle, and thistle has a bad rap. Part of the reason thistle has a bad rap is it's really prickly. So think of someone you know that's really prickly on the outside. Like really prickly on the outside, but once you got to know them, they're like, oh my gosh, what a cool person. I'm really super glad I wasn't put off by them being prickly on the outside. Because then I never would have gotten to know all this like sacredness that they have on the inside, all this wonderfulness that they have on the inside. And that's a little bit of what thistle's all about. So Katrina Blair, the one who wrote The Wisdom of Wild Weeds, she identified that there's 13 invasive weeds that are found on all continents. They're even found in Antarctica with global warming, which is kind of crazy to think about. So these same plants are our survival plants. So they're the plants that are able to withstand the sort of insanity of human development. You know, as we're trashing ecosystems all over, like these are the plants that don't seem to mind what we're doing. And thistle, I would say thistle is like thistle's their spokesperson. Thistle's their cheerleader. It's really, has anyone ever tried to kill thistle or like I mean, I have, so believe me, you're not alone. If you've ever tried to like really get rid of the thistle growing in your yard without using petrochemicals or spraying the land with toxins, pernicious, right? So what does thistle do? This to me is what's so fascinating. I'm going to go to another screen share. Hold on. This is one of the things I learned from Katrina, that it really started to blow me away and help me understand the partnership between humans and plants over time. So here's thistle. And when it starts growing, it looks something like that. And then over time, it sends up a stalk, and it'll have these prickly leaves. And then eventually it'll have this thing that looks like a bit of an artichoke, and it'll send out these crazy heads. And the whole thing is like crazy prickly, right? It's like you touch it and you will get cut, or it's worse than stinging nettles. I read on a website from the United Kingdom Foraging Society or something like that yesterday that as far as they can tell, every species of thistle is edible. Yeah, so it's like, that's what I like about thistle. It's like, can you go wrong? No, it seems to be edible. It's kind of like dandelion. Can you find a dandelion you can't eat? Not really, in terms of species. So how is thistle doing this? And if we understand this, we're going to start to understand so much about plants and so much about plant and ecosystem connectivity and so much about plant and human interconnectivity. And to me, that's like it's a huge goal of mine today with you. So what we see is that which grows above the surface, right? This is what we see. And like we already talked about with people, like sometimes there's more than meets the eye. So with thistle, what we're seeing on top is we're seeing that it's dark green. Dark green is going to mean that it's high in chlorophyll. What does chlorophyll do for the human body? It oxygenates our blood. If your blood has more oxygen, do you have more energy or less energy? More energy. Yeah. Green also, it's interesting in the body, it also has things that are green, things that grow outside that are green, tend to have a taste that is bitter. So that's one of the first tastes of like almost everything that's green. It's like so hard to think of an exception. Like a kiwi fruit might be an exception. Most greens, we're talking about the leafy part of the green. One of the sweetest leafy greens that's an invasive is something like chickweed, where you're not getting that like intense bitter taste. An old dandelion leaf, that'll have a more intense bitter taste. And what bitter taste does is it actually scrapes, I'm just going to use the word crap as a general word for that which the body doesn't want. It scrapes impurities out of the blood. A really common impurity now is inflammation, right? So you're going to see an anti-inflammatory effect with anything that's bitter green. So again, these are some of the things that we see above the surface. So thistles can grow, it seems like thistles can grow anywhere. Has anyone ever seen thistle growing up in like a place where it's just like all rocks? And then there's thistle. It's like, how does it do that? Like super, super rocky soil. Has anyone ever seen thistle growing somewhere that it seems like the land has been really abused and may have had some petrochemical dumping in it, or land that's already been sprayed by petrochemicals? Jennifer is nodding yes, Sally Ann's nodding yes. These things are really hard to kill. So how, like, what's its survival strategy? Its survival strategy is in the taproot. So all of this soil, if we just color the soil here, we'll just make this the dirt. All right. So what's interesting about soil is soil has layers to it. So we could say, well, there's these different layers, and these different layers carry the history of the land. And what thistle seems to do is it can send roots, it can send the roots down. Some of these roots, they splinter, and they splinter off into these little tiny striations of roots. And it can go down, I think I read once, up to 30 feet. It's kind of insane, but all of a sudden you're like, no wonder it survives, because these layers of soil they may be very nutrient poor. So this could be damaged soil, and it could have very, very poor nutrition. But what thistle's able to do is it's able to actually go into deeper levels of soil. And down here, you're going to have all sorts of things. You're going to have a lot of minerals. And those minerals are then going to end up where? Yep, up here. So if you take a plant like kale, say you take organic, commercially farmed kale. You know what I'm talking about? Like you go to the grocery store and you buy so commercially farmed kale. What level of soil is it going to access in terms of nutrition? The top, that's right. So it's just growing into this part, and it's doing the same thing. It's growing its big leafy greens. Let me get my green color back, right? So that's kale. Kale, Swiss chard, beet greens, those are the highest nutrient dense plants in the grocery store today. Right, as food. We're not talking about a supplementation. We're just talking about food. So what does nutrient density mean? It's like there's more good stuff that we need in the human body, and it's on a weight basis. So like weight by weight, more of that is showing up in the plant. So there's two big keys here, I would say, with nutrition in general, as we would say nutrient density and then nutrient diversity. And diversity means there's more different stuff in it that your body needs. Okay, so there's density and there's diversity, and there's two different things. So if you're eating the same things all the time, you don't have as much diversity. Michael Pollan wrote some good books on it back when he was writing more on food and the omnivore's development. Before he started tripping out on mushrooms and caffeine and doing those books, he wrote books about humans and food. Thank you for laughing at that, Joseph. I thought it was funny too. Right, he was writing really about like, what do people eat right now? And what he found is like the average person now that eats the standard diet, and it used to be called the standard American diet, but from what I can tell, I think we've sort of spread our wings globally with that diet, is that people are eating about 30 different types of plants, and the majority of what they're eating is grains, like on a pound per pound basis, right? Where you have corn in the United States that's genetically modified. You've got wheat in the United States that's also genetically modified, meaning that it's not the same. The body doesn't adapt to it the same. So diversity has really taken a hit. It's gone down. Density has also taken a hit if we're monocropping and getting crops out of the topsoil, even if they're organic. And this is something to start to like really consider, like, oh my goodness, thistle, it's free. It's everywhere. And by the nature of its system, it's pulling nutrients from way, way, way deep down. Now, the reason it's a permaculture plant, and this, like, you can tell I'm pretty excited about thistle. This to me is what's absolutely mind-blowing about thistle, is thistle, it really takes its greenery to an extensive level. Hold on, let me rearrange my furniture here. So what happens with thistle is, like, this really does happen, and like all this greenery ends up above the surface of the earth. Now, what happens when the plant dies? It comes winter and the plant dies. What happens to the plant? It starts to compost, right? It spreads out. Thanks, Soko. Yeah, it starts to spread out. So now what's happening with all these minerals? Where are they ending up? Whoop, they're creating the topsoil. Crazy pants, huh? So these things, and what do we do as a culture? I mean, I'm not sure if, I mean, maybe there's some countries that aren't doing this. From what I gather, a lot of countries are kind of like how we are running in the United States, which is what we do in terms of our land management policy is we spray petrochemicals on these plants that are regenerating the topsoil. It's kind of nuts when you think about it. So there's most counties, including the county where I live, have these massive spray programs where they spray petrochemicals on the topsoil. There's one county where Katrina Blair, our heroine of the day, author of this book, where she lives, where they have no spray policy. And what she's found is that you can actually tincture these plants and spray it on the invasives and it'll return to the native ecosystem. So there's all sorts of things that we don't really know as humans. What I would say is, in general, we have some beliefs about food, we have some beliefs about our body, and we have some beliefs about our environment. And if we look at the Judeo-Christian perspective, so if you've been raised in a Judeo-Christian culture, in general, that belief system was man over nature, man to conquer nature. And so we're still suffering from some residuals of that, which can make us afraid to taste wild plants and eat wild plants, and can make us want to spray chemicals on things that we think are weeds, et cetera. So from all the research I've done, that's more or less where I've landed at. In the most simplistic form, there's a reason that for most of us in our counties, we're spraying the plants that are actually the most nutrient dense, that are trying to replenish the topsoil. Okay, I don't want to get like hyper political on this. The other fascinating thing is that the minerals and the vitamins and these phytonutrients, so that's at nutrient density. Another way to say that is phyto, that means plant. I've done a lot of interviewing. I've over 500 podcast episodes, and I've talked to a lot of people about plants over the last decade who have different specializations in the field. From what I know from the plant scientists who are studying phytonutrients, is we don't know them all. We're still discovering very specific plant chemicals, which are also called phytochemicals, which are phytonutrients. We're still discovering them. So we don't know all that's out there. What we do know is that there's more diversity than we ever knew, and that when we eat plants that have phytonutrient diversity, the human body gets healthier. It gets more wild. It gets less conventional. It gets more alive. And to me, that's really exciting, and it kind of makes sense when we actually partner with nature. Instead of man over nature, when we partner with nature, there's all these unexpected benefits. There's all these like really cool interrelated things that start to happen. There's these discoveries that we start to experience for ourselves. Okay, so that's a little bit about the permaculture plants and the invasives and why they're really our friends, not our foes. I mean, it's interesting that I've been like looking on research for stuff. A lot of the problem with some of the research on phytonutrients and nutrient density is, so far to date, there really hasn't been an industry around studying this stuff. So because we don't have market demand for thistle, so to speak, like we don't have a good nutrient density profile on thistle. If anyone ever finds anything with the invasives and nutrient density, please send it to me, or nutrient profiles, because I'm super interested in it. And I've asked a lot of experts in the field about it, and they're like, yeah, it's not information that, that has been studied. So there's a lot about plants that we don't know. All right. Any questions so far? Are the roots of thistle edible as well? Yeah, from what I can tell, there's no part of thistle that's not edible. But it's the greens that you want, and it's the greens in spring that you want. You probably want to know how to harvest the thing, right? Because it's prickly. Because it's prickly, you wear gloves. Yep, you wear gloves. What I do, I usually harvest quite a bit of it. I turn it into a green powder. I'll show you some slides on how I just like dry stuff, and then I put it in a blender once it's completely dry. I might dry it on a table, then move it into a dehydrator, and then powder it. But you can make like a year's supply in a, you know, in a weekend kind of thing where you're only working on it like a half an hour at a time. It's often with plants, your relationship with time changes. So with thistle, yeah, I usually like fill a bucket of water, get out my gloves and a pair of scissors. If I'm just getting like enough for that day's smoothie, I'll just fill a bowl with water, because there's often little bugs that love to live inside the thistle. They can burrow in. You can see in that plant how they can kind of burrow in. Are you guys you're not looking at my thistle plant. Let me help. Let me get this right. So they can kind of burrow in. And then you got to ask, like, well, why do the bugs like it? What are the bugs getting out of it? They're getting moisture and they're getting food. So then I just kind of rinse the plant that I've cut. And then I put it in a blender, usually with some water or some coconut water, and maybe an apple, maybe a little bit of lemon. I got this recipe from Katrina Blair. She's a big thistle junkie. And then you drink your thistle. You can also, if you don't like the grit, you can strain it out, and then you can have it as a juice. I just squeeze it through a nut milk bag, and then you've created a green juice. Has anyone noticed like how much it seems like how expensive greens are? Like a bunch of kale, right? Or a bunch of Swiss chard is like, especially if it's organic. And then you think like this stuff's free and it's higher in nutrient density, and it's more diverse in nutrient density, and you can't kill it. Like even if you really tried, like you're not going to dig that deep. So that's where it starts to get really curious. And this is where I find like the more you understand about plants, the more it starts to change what you believe about the world, and even what you believe about consumerism and economy, because you can start to see that a lot of solutions are just right outside your door. This is the phase I like to harvest the plant at. I know that's not a very good picture. It's not that, let me see if I shrink it, if it comes in better. I had trouble finding a plant in this phase on the internet. I should have just gone in my yard and taken a picture. I got a new iPhone yesterday. So I've had like, you know, that thing where like you can't take pictures because your data's transferring. That's what was going on. Yeah. Otherwise I would have taken, because there's a whole bunch of them right in my yard right now. And they just like the snow's just melted, the green's just coming out, and they're perfect. This is what I call baby thistle. So baby thistle is kind of like a baby elephant. Like there's not much babyish about it. Like it's pretty big when it gets born. This is a really great phase. I don't really like to harvest it that much in this phase. So what I would do with a plant like this is I would just cut it down and it will just go back to its baby phase, which is kind of fun. So you can keep thistle patches going. Many of you will discover that you have some of these plants in your yard. I have another picture of one. I thought that was really funny. Let me find it. This one. This is so thistle. As you get to know thistle, and I often will personify plants, I think thistle's a she. I'll give it a sex, right? And as I get to know thistle, it's like she will grow anywhere and she will hog space. She will take up so much space that the other plants can't grow. Like that's thistle for you, right? And when you look at it and you're just like, what is growing outside you? For you, some of you, it's not going to be thistle. It's going to be dandelion. Or someone on the Body Thrive call in the last hour, it was chickweed, right? And she was like, oh my gosh, like there's chickweed all over my garden beds. So you'll just start to notice what is showing up in abundance. Now, some people who are like really deep into plants and spirituality, they'll say there's a reason for that what you need is growing in abundance around you. And it's part of abundance consciousness, that perspective or that belief. And I know for me, when I started to get that, it was like, oh my gosh, you start to be able to receive the gifts of what's showing up in your all different parts of your life. The things that you think are problems. A lot of people would see this thistle outside their house and say that's a problem. You actually start to see them as gifts. And that will give you great peace of mind, but it'll also access you into higher levels of consciousness and higher levels of order as you're able to bring those gifts into your body and into your life. All right, enough about thistle.
Hey, just before we move on, we have a couple of questions about thistle. If you could verify, does it matter what type of thistle?
Yeah.
And I think you also just answered the question, from Tiffany, did you plant your thistle?
No.
Or is it just growing?
Yeah, I don't plant invasive weeds. I think it's illegal, actually. In some places, it's illegal to plant invasive weeds. Do you remember, Anna, do you remember Batul Morelli? She just messaged me on that thread. I have this picture on my Facebook thread I went for a bike ride 2 days ago and I was stuffing my face with spring beauties, which are these like the opposite of thistle. Spring beauties are this very, very delicate flower. They're one of the first things that bud in high altitude ecosystems. They're very delicate. And I harvest it so I try not to take the root. So I just kind of pluck it from above. And then this little delicate flower. And I posted this picture. I'm in my mountain bike helmet and my sunglasses. And I have, again, my mouth is like full of these spring beauties. And there were like 50 comments on that in like a day. And it brought some people out of the woodwork in my life, including Batul. So years ago, Batul asked me, she wanted me to send her some thistle seeds to South Dakota where she was living. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure they're already there. So find a local botanist that can show you what they are. And I think it's illegal. So you're really not supposed to plant invasives, and you don't need to, because either you're in a healthy ecosystem with native plants, which your botanist will show you what's what, and then you can read in the books and read on the internet what to eat from that plant when, and how to harvest it sustainably, or there'll just be tons of invasives right there. And as you learn how to use them, they're there. So, okay. So every species is edible, weight for weight. Thistles come out higher in fiber. If you don't want the fiber, you strain it through a nut milk bag if you're making a smoothie or a juice, or smoothing into a juice. Weight by weight, higher in protein. Now, isn't that fascinating? Like higher in protein than other greens, like even kind of wild. Phosphorus, and this is where you get all the minerals. Then you go into mineral land, phosphorus, magnesium, calcium, copper, zinc, and other nutrients. If anyone's worried about bone density, right? Thistle's a good friend. Same with lamb's quarter. I don't think I have, let me Google a picture of lamb's quarter for you guys. Lamb's quarter is insanely high in calcium. It's lamb's quarter is in the same family as amaranth. Amaranth is another invasive. Okay, here's a good picture. I'm gonna do a new screen share. Is anyone's taking like a CalMag supplement? You know what I'm talking about, calcium, magnesium supplement? Like you might start thinking like, wait, maybe I should make my own green powder out of some plants that are growing right outside my yard. Okay, this is lamb's quarter. And it's, again, if it's more purple, if you're seeing it's like, oh, it looks just like that, it's more purple. It's this real soft looking, kind of jagged edged, and it's not very tall. Like if it gets 10 inches tall, it's bolted. But when they're babies, when they're like 4 to 6 inches tall, they're delicate. You can throw them into salads. This is what it looks like when it's, boy, sorry, I didn't have a picture of lamb's quarter ready. When it bolts, it gets seedy. You get those these little tiny seeds at the top. So if it's purple, if it looks exactly like lamb's quarter and it's purple, it's amaranth. Amaranth, many of you buy like fancy bag. Has anyone bought amaranth flour? It's a cool grain to cook with. Yeah. I like it instead of using like regular flour. And if I'm going to make like cookies, I'll use amaranth and almond flour. That's an aside. In any case, the amaranth and the lamb's quarter, they look more or less exactly the same, except for one's purple. You add it to your salads. When you get different colors in food, you know you're getting different phytonutrients. All right, enough of that. So thistle's crazy high, and amaranth is crazy high in calcium. Here we go, back to the slides. One of the things that I notice a lot is like the more you study plants, the more you see sacred geometry. It's like when you take an apple and you cut it the wrong way, you cut it between the poles, you see that, and you see the seeds and you see the pattern, and it awakens you into patterns and into consciousness. And I found it really fascinating. I was looking through a bunch of my different slide decks, putting together this talk. And this is the Sri Yantra, which is, it's one of the most famous geometrical patterns that arises from the Vedic system, where it looks at like how do patterns and consciousness mix. So when you're looking at plants, even when I was looking at the thistle, I'm like, that looks exactly like the Sri Yantra. We've got these like intersecting triangles, and you have these levels of depth and layering. And this starts to happen the more you're looking at plants and identifying plants, is you'll notice that they have, like, even the way a botanist will describe a plant is you'll start to see the patterns within a plant. And that itself gets you more connected to seeing patterns in your body, seeing patterns in your life, seeing patterns in sacred geometry. And that itself is incredibly, incredibly healing to the mind. This is an example of like when you start to see the patterns in the lungs and in the body, and you see the trees and how they're like the lungs. And then we're like, oh, wait, the trees are off-gassing carbon dioxide, or off-gassing oxygen, and we're breathing in oxygen, and we're off-gassing carbon dioxide. And the trees are receiving that and turning that into energy. And we start to experience this interconnectivity. And to me, that's what so much of what plant wisdom is about, is starting to tap into that. There's these shapes, there are these patterns, they're how plants grow, and they help the human mind organize. Like so much of what we're taking in with our phones and our sort of digital experience is disorganizing. Whereas if we start to study plants, even if you're just curious about like what's growing around you, and you start to look at any of the plants or the different parts of the plants, the seed, the flower, the fruit, you'll start to see that there's patterns within. And it's those patterns that the botanists use in order to describe how one plant is different than another plant. It's their language. All right, so I also want to get a bit into, I'll get into a few different plants here that are, again, maybe surprising. They're invasive, they're everywhere. And then I'll talk a little bit about the 6 tastes and how to notice what you're tasting in plants. So in general, most people I find, and I've introduced a lot of people to a lot of plants. I'm often in the woods and biking with friends or hiking with friends, and I'll just grab something off a tree and start eating it. And I'll be like, well, what is that? I want some. And I warn people, I'm like, wild plants taste wild. And our palate is pretty much conventional at this point. Even organic foods, because they're monocropped, they don't have the phytonutrient density, which gives the taste a lot of different ecstatic flavors. So we'll get a little bit not quite yet. I want to get more into specific plants because I know that's where your main interest is. But we'll get a little bit into how to start to taste what you're tasting. So you stop associating with, I like it or I don't like it. Because that's not a very educated way to experience wild plants and to rewild your palate. I would assume in general, for most people with a conventional palate, meaning you haven't tasted a lot of wild foods, they're not part of your regular diet, that most of these foods at first you're going to say, I don't like it, which is really just a way of saying I'm not familiar with it. So in general, our palate and how we taste is relative. It's based on relativity. It's based on what you've eaten lately. A friend of mine was in Ayurveda college. This was maybe 20 years ago. And her sister was overweight and pretty stressed out and would eat fast food, would just more or less eat fast food, exclusively fast food. You know, like the stuff at like McDonald's, like that kind of stuff, the stuff at the convenience store, that kind of stuff. Very low in phytonutrients, right? Really, really low in nutrient density. I would even say nutrient density can go 2 ways. You can eat things that actually take nutrient density out of the tissue of your body. You can see this in like crystal meth addicts, right? If you want to look at the extreme, you can see it in alcoholics. right? Or they're putting something in the body that's actually depleting the body of nutrient density. So this woman, my friend's sister, my friend's in our Ayurveda school, she's cooking all her own food. Plus she was a farmer. She was a gardener farmer. So she knew tons about plants and she had this really healthy diet, and her sister could not eat her food. She's like, it just tastes bad to me. So in Ayurveda, there's a saying that taste is relative. Taste is relative. What you like to taste is relative to what you've been tasting lately. So as you start to integrate more wild foods, what you want to start to characterize is not, do I like it or not, right? Because you can learn to like it. You can see this with alcohol. Remember the first time you tasted alcohol? For those of you who like a good drink or like a good glass of wine, remember the first time you tasted that? Or coffee, right? You give a 10-year-old a sip of coffee or alcohol, and usually they're like, babies are the exception. Babies like beer because its sourness reminds them of breast milk, right? Aside from that, most kids you give something to, they're like, ugh. But then with adaptation, we learn to like things, and then we learn to love things. So what we want to do is develop some language around it. So the language around taste is that there's 6 of them. Some of the tastes build. They're the ones that are connected from the pink triangle. So sweet and sour and salty are tastes that will increase the size and mass of your body. They're the building tastes. The opposite tastes, pungent, bitter, and astringent, are the tastes that reduce. They shrink the size of your body. They shrink the tissues. And there's health benefits to both, right? We need all 6 tastes. In our Ayurveda, we'd even say we want all 6 tastes in like any real meal. You won't even be satisfied unless you have all 6 tastes. So part of the problem with like the modern weight and obesity epidemic is that our diet is so much centered on the tastes that build, sweet taste, which is all grains, meats, milks, sugars, obviously. Salty, this is any salt added to food, and sourness. And sourness would even be like adding ketchup to French fries. That's how like the modern diet gets excess sour. Because of that, we don't have the balance. Now, most of the things that I'm going to show you in terms of the edible greens are bitter, they're pungent, and they're astringent. So they anecdote the diet, the modern human diet. And that's so important to realize, is like these plants, the taste might be like, it's different. I don't like different. I don't like this. And instead what you want to taste and you want to ask yourself is, what am I tasting? Because in understanding what you're tasting, you're starting to actually be able to understand plants as medicine and start to understand, well, what does bitter do? Oh, bitter taste. I remember bitter taste scrapes. What is it scraping? It's scraping the stuff out of my blood that my body doesn't want. That seems helpful. So scraping bitter tastes are blood cleansers. The fancy word for that in herbalism is alternatives. And most of the leafy greens are alternatives. Like, it's really hard for me to think of a leafy green that's not an alternative. Like, I'd have to sit here for a really long time and think about that. And I might come up with something like butter lettuce because it's not that bitter, right? That would be that's the most extreme sweetness as applied to a green, is something like butter lettuce. Okay. So on to plants and what we can do with them. We'll talk. I want to talk about purslane. We'll talk about dandelion. We've already talked about thistle. We'll talk about plantain. Another picture of plantain. We'll talk about chickweed, and then I'll talk about a little bit about some berries. Again, what the actual plants we talk about don't matter as much as what's growing in your ecosystem. Okay. I am picking plants that grow in every ecosystem, so that should help you be able to find at least one of these around. Everyone's heard of dandelion. Anna, do you have control of recordings to mute? Because
can you make me co-host and I'll go ahead and mute.
Oh, yeah. I can totally co-host you.
Thanks.
Bada bing, bada boom. So dandelion's interesting. When you look at dandelions, you see that there's the root. You can see the white part, and then you can see the greens. Obviously, there's the flowers as well. By the time a plant has flowered, it's taken energy out of its root and out of its green. So if we're eating a plant for the greenness of it, we want to have a plant that hasn't yet flowered. Now, dandelions can survive for years and years. So they're perennial. So there's annual plants that have an annual growth cycle. They grow and they die. And then it takes a new seed to germinate for that next plant to begin. Dandelions obviously reseed themselves. You know, if you've ever like taken a dandelion and blowing all the little seeds apart, right? It's like picture the 3-year-old with the dandelion and they're blowing seeds all over the place. Dandelions are very good at reseeding themselves, but they also have roots that last for a really long time, years and years and years and years and years. So the root of the plant, roots in general, I only harvest roots of plants that are in abundance in my ecosystem.
The water in the bird bath. Yeah. Birds don't care. It's water.
You can't get, let me see if I can.
It's for them to drink.
I still don't have access to
I saw a few landing in it. So I was like, oh, I wonder if there's water. So I filled it up.
There we go. You still don't have co-host. Oh, I see. There we go. Okay, we're good. So back to dandelions. The cool thing about newer roots of dandelions is they're really sweet. So if you can find like a new fresh patch of dandelions that looks really healthy and looks kind of young, and you dig up the roots, you'll notice the roots have a lot more of that. They'll have a lot more of this pithy white part that's right between the green and the root. That part will be more developed and it'll be sweet. So again, what I would do with it is I'd have a bucket of water and I'd rinse it off. I'm not trying to get all of the dirt off. Often we're surprised when we start to harvest plants that they're dirty. Because often we buy, no, it's like really kind of weird. Like for those of us who've grown up, like just buying vegetables out of the grocery store, it's really hard to find a carrot with dirt on it in a conventional grocery store. We don't even know how much dirt we used to eat as humans and how long ago. But what we do know is that humans used to actually suffer from their teeth wearing out because there was so much dirt in the vegetables that they were eating. So we know humans used to have a lot of dirt. Dirt is microbiomes. So it actually is healing to your body's microbiome. Dirt on your hands, dirt in your mouth, dirt in your gut. So it's not important to get your plants entirely clean of every little particle of dirt, which is maybe what you're used to buying in the store. Like a little dirt goes a long way. Now, it's hard to get the dirt out of like that little white section in there. And it's sometimes hard to get the dirt out of the root where it's like, it looks like dirt. It's brown because it's been surrounded by dirt. It's part of it. It's not important to get it like super sparkling clean. So in general, the older the plant is, the more medicinal it is. And again, you know, what we learn from plants and ecosystems, it parallels life. If we look at elders in a community, they hold more wisdom than the new batch that just sprouted up and hasn't lived through decades and decades of life. And plants are the same way. They become more powerful with age. They're more of a food when they're younger. They're more of a medicine when they're older. And so a plant like dandelion, or another root that I harvest sparingly where I'm at, is Oregon graperoot. And it does grow in abundance where I'm at, so I'm okay harvesting the root. In general, you would never harvest more than at 1/10 of a patch. And then what I notice is the more you harvest, the more you take care of your patches. Like even if it's just energetic that you take care of them, but I'll also like replant their seeds in areas to help the plant itself regenerate. Okay, so in general, roots of plants are bitter. And the older the root, the more bitter it is. What else do you need to know about dandelion? I mean, I think people know that the root, it regulates blood sugar for diabetics. You may have heard of that one. You may have known that the leaf is diuretic, right? So you'd never give dandelion leaves to like a 5-year-old that has trouble, you know, not going to the bathroom at night in their bed, because it's diuretic. It's going to make you pee more, but it's also therefore great for people that have issues with kidneys, that have inflammation in their kidneys, that have inflammation in their blood. The dandelion is going to be a really good blood cleanser. I have a bunch of words here on that, the description of how it thins bile through balancing the systems of in Ayurvedic language. Those of you who are here for the Ayurvedic part, it's especially detoxing to the pitta that's in the small intestine. That's what pachaka pitta means. Taranjaka pitta, that means the pitta in the liver. Many of you know that dandelions, both the leaf and the root, are a liver cleanser. And then Kledaka kapha, that is like it's like mucus in the stomach that turns into mucus in the lungs and sinuses. So those who have heavy digestion, those who have hyperacidity, like dandelions are a really great friend. And you can just harvest greens and put them in your salads. You can put them in your smoothies. I'll often harvest a bunch of different greens, dry them, and make them into a powder. Okay, I want to talk about purslane. Let me blow this picture up for you. You see the little yellow flowers? I don't know if you can tell, but the little leaves, and this whole plant is maybe, let me shrink it back. Well, I want to show you before I shrink it back. You see the reddish veins of the stalks? It's like a succulent. So it's almost like those cactusy plants that hold a lot of water within them. Insanely high in omega-3 fatty acids, which are really good for scavenging free radicals in the body, which is basically like taking toxicity out of the body and helping the body absorb oxygen. So purslane or purslane, depending on how you pronounce it, where you are, the whole thing above ground is edible. In terms of taste, it's nowhere near as bitter as the dandelions and the thistles. It's sour, it's salty, it's moisturizing. That succulent nature makes it mucilaginous, meaning it's really soothing to the tissue of the body because it has so much moisture in it. It's going to add moisture into the body in a way that's slimy. So there's so much in understanding edible plants that you trust your experience, but you analyze your experience. And as you're chewing it, you'll be like, this is slimy. Okay, well, what might slimy as a quality do for my body? Well, if I had dryness in my body, it might help with that. If I had digestion where it seemed like I was trapping air, which is bloating, trapped air is drawing to the body. What this is going to do is it's going to slimy things that like smooths things out. Because you're eating it, it's smoothing out the process of digesting and absorbing nutrition into your body. So it is a nutrient-dense superfood, vitamin A, vitamin C, potassium, magnesium, iron, calcium. This is the permaculture effect. It brings moisture to other plants. So as it decomposes, it brings more moisture. It also holds a lot of moisture in the root system, and that helps bring moisture into the other plants that grow around it. So anyone who has stomach acid issues, bloating issues, things like colitis, ulcerative colitis, IBS, check out your new friend purslane. Purslane, I often find it like growing up through the cracks in the concrete. You know, there's a lot of these invasives are like, man, they're hardy. They can grow up through anywhere. And if you see something that looks kind of spidery, it's like spidery crawling across the concrete or across pavers is where another place I see it. You might also see it in dirt, but I often see it in like really disturbed soil or places where it's actually trapped. The soil is trapped underneath concrete. It'll spider its way out and it'll just sprawl on top. And it'll just look for those purple veins and those little tiny yellow flowers and those leaves are only like a half an inch. And then what do you do with it? You rinse it off. Put a little bit in your smoothie. You can dry some, you can have it as tea. The whole idea is like get it in your body. More and more what I find is like, I just eat stuff. I just rinse it off and eat it. It's just kind of like, you know, it's like, it's right there. I'm just going to eat some because these plants are so phytonutrient dense that a little goes a long way. You can add it to salads or smoothies. Okay. This is my new friend, plantain. So plantain and I do not have a long history together, but one of these things that you'll notice with plants is like, once you notice what they look like, you'll start to notice them. Does anyone who's never eaten plantain look at this and say like, I've seen you before? Yeah, right? That's how these guys work. You've all seen all the invasives, I promise, right? You might not have an intimate relationship with them yet, meaning they might not have become part of your body yet, but you know, as you get to know them, you'll see, you can see the stalk That's what they're known for, is like a few things. One is, you see the striations of the leaf, how the veins go all the way to the tip of the leaf. And then you see the stalk that it shoots up. So again, we're going to see all of the tastes with bitter greens. They're bitter and they're astringent, meaning they have a scraping quality. Anything that has that quality is going to decongest the liver and the blood. It's going to decongest the lungs and the mucus and the sinuses. So you'll see a real repetitive theme with the invasive leafy greens. They really almost all have that. I would say purslane is like the one different one because it's more of a succulent. It's less bitter. Skin issues, headaches, diabetes, helps with weight gain or weight loss rather. How would you use plantain? It's a little bit of a tougher green. So I find if you saute it more like Swiss chard, it's kind of the equivalent of Swiss chard, where you wouldn't necessarily eat chard raw. Like it's better just lightly steamed, maybe with a little bit of butter and salt and pepper. I find the butter, salt, and pepper mix goes with like almost everything. When in doubt, that's what I use. Some people might use avocado oil or olive oil or ghee when you're sauteing, but it just needs like a little light bit of steam. So this is what some of the more mature leaves look like. Again, high in vitamin A, C, K. You're just going to find like they all are going to say the same thing. They're wicked high in vitamins and and minerals. There's also phytonutrients within them that might be really quite unique to the specific plant. You know, like phosphorus or zinc. Okay, now let's talk about chickweed. So chickweed, this came up in the Body Thrive call today, where one of the members I was saying, like, all of a sudden there's like chickweed everywhere. The same thing happened to me. I had raised beds at my last house, and all of a sudden there was like this massive chickweed invasion. Chickweed tends to grow like this. Like you will never see like a little bit of chickweed. Usually you'll see a ton of chickweed where it just overtakes, it creates these patches of things. Whereas like dandelions might be in patches, but dandelions you'll also see in the woods, just like they're like one off. There'll be one here, one there. Same thing with plantain, like one here, one there, not chickweed. Chickweed's like the Brady Bunch, like it just sticks together and it's like there's a lot of it. It's really delicate. You can't, like if you harvest it today, you won't really be able to save it till tomorrow unless you put it in a dehydrator and dry it. And it's not even worth doing that because it's so ultra fine. I love it in salads. You could also saute it if you wanted to, but I just think it's amazing in salads and in smoothies. It's really sweet. Ayurvedically, we'd say it's like more of a vata pacifying green. It's one of the few that are like less bitter. It's more like butter lettuce. It doesn't have a strong taste at all. So it's good for a lot of the things that people that have more vata in their constitution, and those who don't know about Ayurveda and constitutions, the vata type is often more delicate in nature. So people that have more of a delicate constitution might be more delicate emotionally or more transparent emotionally, like not people that can like hold a lot in, but people that like just constantly let things out is more vata. Vata also, they tend to be people that have like, especially if you look at like childhood photos, are like leaner, lighter, lankier. That's all vata. And vatas in general struggle with digestion, absorption, and elimination. There's just not a lot of moisture in that constitution. And so it can make digestion harder. And chickweed is something that you'll see, like that's really what it helps with. It helps with constipation. It helps with stomach issues. It helps with bowel issues. And it doesn't have a really, really strong taste, which makes it easier for someone who's more sensitive and delicate to digest and absorb. All right. It's also good for a lot, all leafy greens are going to be good for skin issues, etc. So what happens is as this inner and outer ecosystem, as you start to eat more plants from outside your ecosystem, these plants become part of your inner ecosystem of your body. They become part of the sort of nutrients that you're building your bodily tissue out of. But what also starts to happen is you start to feel more connected to your ecosystem and to take better care of where you're sourcing your food from. And that inner, outer, inner is really what helps build a healthy microbiome in your physiology. And you're now helping the microbiome in the soil and the dirt outside of your physiology thrive. And so this connection, this is what I love about basic permaculture theory. A stable ecosystem has a lot of connections. So the way that I look at that is the more connected I am to a lot of the different types of plants, and I try to learn 2 a year. I'm not that aggressive in my knowledge, right? I'm just trying to incorporate like 2 new plants into my everyday diet a year. So it's not a lot, right? So for some of you, if that might be like chickweed, okay, I'm going to start using chickweed, and it might be thistle or purslane. And can I just bring this a little bit more? Because if you added 2 this year and 2 next year, those 4 things that you're not going to be able to find in the grocery store, right? Which is a diversity, right? A diversity of phytonutrients that otherwise your body's not going to get. You're not going to get the same stuff. It's not available via conventional farming methodology. The other thing that starts to happen is you start to feel more connected. You start to feel more connected to time and place. The other thing that'll happen, and it'll, for some of you, it'll happen dramatically, and others, it'll happen subtly, is you start to feel more relaxed and more grounded and just more connected in general. And there's a spiritual side to this where you're just actually assimilating more to your ecosystem. So the plants will give you back things very physically in your physical body in terms of nutrients, but you'll also start to absorb this subtle experience of feeling like, oh my gosh, like the planet's trying to feed me for free. And when you start to experience that, it's like your whole shift to consumer culture starts to really change, and you become much more open to the energy and intelligence of yourself as a human being who's co-evolved on this planet that's packed full of nutrition. So I did want to talk about allergies, and we actually have, we're giving you guys a special offer. You'll see it in your emails too, around allergy. I have a whole allergy relief course because I know a lot of people who are interested in plants and discovering their ecosystem. There can be questions about like, why am I allergic to my ecosystem? Like, why am I allergic to pollen? Or why do I have certain food sensitivities in general? And where will that fit in with wild plants? In general, this is the deal, is the more you eat your ecosystem, the more the ecosystem becomes your microbiome, becomes your physiology, the less reactive you are to your ecosystem. Because the body sees allergies as an immune response. So if someone has allergies, whether they're plant allergies or food allergies or animal allergies, or even allergies to things that like seem to transcend categories like dust from what? Dust and dander. Dander's coming from animals. Dust is coming from what? From disintegrated parts of our environment. If someone has allergies, it's a sign that the immune system is compromised. It's one of the first signs of a compromised immune system is allergies. It's one of the first signs that there's too much inflammation in the body, that inflammation is creating confusion in the body, and the body is now reacting to the environment rather than receiving the environment. It's kind of like when there's feedback, it's like someone's got feedback for you and they've got to tell you something, and it might be something that you don't want to hear. And if you react to that feedback, you don't receive it. So you don't integrate it into your growth and your personality. If someone gives you feedback and you're able to receive it, you actually grow and assimilate as part of that. So in that same way, if someone is reacting to food, if they're reacting to their environment, if they're reacting to their ecosystem, it's a sign that their physiology isn't relaxed. It's a sign that they're not part of their ecosystem. And so how do we bring that ecosystem back into right relationship with the person? And as that happens, what happens is you end up decreasing inflammation in all sorts of other ways that really empower a stronger immune system. So there's been questions too around like, well, are food allergies then different than allergies to plants or pollen outside the house? And, from the research that I've done on this with Ayurveda and the people I've interviewed and the podcast and whatnot, is it's like, for the most part, no, like food allergies are a sign again that the physiology is compromised or that nutrients aren't coming in, right? That we're not eating real nutrients. So the more we connect the dots. So in any case, we wanted to let you guys know we have this allergy relief workshop, and you guys can get, it's got all these lessons on what are allergies and allergies in the immune system, and a bunch on Ayurveda and understanding the different body types with allergies and what your system might be responding to or reacting to, and how to partner with your physiology to overcome allergies. And then there's a number of different lessons that are more on like the background of Ayurveda and your body type and digestion. So we have like a deal for you. You guys can get, I'll put the link in our chat here. And we have a coupon code. Actually, Anna, if you can do that, that would be great. I seem to lose some of my controls.
Yeah, I've just popped the link in the chat. What do you know the coupon code for today?
Yeah,
Kate?
it's and it's there on the screen. It's relief with an exclamation point in all caps. I used to have allergies from when I was like 10 years old till it took me, I mean, they were really bad in my 20s. I was studying Ayurveda and I was starting to learn how to detox my system. And it honestly, from that point, it still took a number of years for me to be allergy free. So I had allergies, I'd say from maybe 10 till about early 30s. And I just thought I would have to have allergies forever. It was, you know, like the itchy eyes, the snotty nose, the itchy reactive skin, all that. And I just want to say, like, one of the reasons I've created this, it's a workshop that's a series of classes. It's actually packed with, so you can really get to know what your body's reacting to or responding to. Or if you have kids with allergies or a spouse or partner with allergies or friends with allergies, please share this, because I just want everyone to know that like allergies are optional. Allergies are a sign that you're not in sync with your ecosystem. They're a sign that your body's disconnected from the plants outside your door. And the more you can integrate that, boy, what starts to happen is not just do you become allergy free, but your whole physiology starts to become more healthy and more vibrant. And you have the experience of like, oh my gosh, I'm not allergic to the world, or I'm not allergic to food. And to me, it's so super empowering. I wanted to share just one more thing on, you know, some of the surprising things I found about with plants. I was, like I said, I'm on like two new plants a year. So hawthorn grows everywhere as well. It's on all continents, except Antarctica. And it's super fascinating, super high in antioxidants. It's one of these plants that have been used for heart disease for a really long time. It's also really good for people that have any sort of problem like digesting fat. Like, it seems to change how our body metabolizes and digests. So what's interesting to me is, like, I've known about hawthorn for years. I used to make herbal formulas back when I was in Ayurveda school that had powdered hawthorn berry for people that had heart diseases in it. I have a piece of land that has, I mean, my guess is over 100 hawthorn berry trees. And yet I didn't really, like, when I was doing some research for this class, I was thinking, like, I love my service berries. I save, I don't know, maybe this year I maybe harvested 20 pounds of service berries. But like the hawthorn, I just kind of left for the birds. And this is often our experience with plants. And I just want to end on this, because like the more I study Ayurveda, and the more I teach it in our Living Ayurveda course, and the more I connect people to ecosystems, into plants and plant-based diet in all our courses at Yogahealer, the more I learned that there's so much more to learn. So I was reading about hawthorn, and I was reading about how other people are using hawthorn, and it was really cool, because like the more you rewild your palate, right, and the more you rewild your palate, things like allergies or immune challenges go away, like getting sick goes away. The more your desire to eat real nutrients, so a lot of desire for like crappy food or emotional eating, that just starts to go away because your body craves the nutrient density. Is the more you actually become open to tasting other things and really receiving the gift. And so for me right now, for me this summer, it's all about plantain, and it's all about hawthorn berries. And with the hawthorn, when I was reading about it, it was like, you know, this one guy who's a big harvester in the UK who I followed, he was saying that, like, you know, like right when they're at this bright red phase, before they get mealy on the inside, like just grab a handful when you're on the trail, like just grab a handful And just have them, you know, before a meal or have them as a snack. And what I was thinking is like, wow, if I can retrain my palate to experience hawthorn, I'm going to have an antioxidant that otherwise my body would not have any access to. So I just wanted to end on that, because this whole process of rewilding ourselves and rewilding our ecosystem, it's not like a one and done. Like, you can keep integrating, you know, like, what's the next plant? What's a plant that's growing around you now that you might know as a medicine, or you might know of as a food, but you're not using it? Because when you use it, you'll really be able to receive it as the gift that it is. And your physiology will be that much more intelligent. You'll be that much more connected to your ecosystem. And when that happens, there's an experience that, for those of you who study yoga, you may have heard of this experience. It's like a highest state of experiences of yoga. And it's called Niralambaya, and it means that which is without support. So you start to become so much a part of your ecosystem that you don't need to be supported. Like, who you are is so inherently part of the ecosystem that you're supporting, and it's supporting you, that you stop looking outside for support. And to me, that's like really one of the greatest gifts that the plants have taught me, is that there's always nourishment. It's always right here. Are my eyes open? Is my palate adapting? And the more I learn that, the more honestly I learn, like in our Living Ayurveda course, which is a popular course for people who want to rewild themselves and deeply understand the gifts of their own human physiology and understand health and disease and to heal. Is when you have that experience of that you've got it all, what you're starting to understand is the universal laws. And at that point, it's really easy to help anyone feel better. It's really easy to be a boon, not just to yourself, but to your family and to the core people in your life. All right. I have a few minutes for Q&A. Anna and Kim, if anyone's interested in anything we do at Yogahealer or how we can help you, go to yogahealer.com/conversation. And you can, Anna and Kim are both here. And they'll be the people that you'll talk to. I want to say, like, over the last, 13 years of teaching the Living Ayurveda course, what I notice more and more is, like, the more rewilded I become, the easier it is to explain what's happening to someone in their physiology when they're sick or when they're diseased or when they're not feeling well, or to understand the root causes of issues. And so much of that comes from just really, really understanding plants and rewilding through plants. All right. Do you want to field a few questions, Kim? I mean, Anna or whoever. I think, Kim, you're not on. I can also give you access to hosting. Yeah.
So I guess we had an earlier question from Tiffany just around chemical protection. So I think it's just pretty black and white, isn't it? Don't eat where they spray.
Yeah. I mean, you guys were emailed a bunch of podcasts on plants that I've recorded over time, and one with Philip Stark was really, was really illuminating. Plants, even plants that grow in toxic soil, seem to not take on the toxicity, which is really quite wild. But in general, yeah, like, you want to care, like, that which you take into your body, you want to care for as your body. It's that simple. So you stop seeing things outside of yourself that you're going to take into yourself as separate from you. And that makes you that much more selective, right? Of, like, that which I want to take in. I don't want to take in stuff that's growing in toxic soil or growing where I know that they're spraying petrochemicals. Like, I want to treat myself. I want to treat myself right. And what'll happen is, like, often we have a consumer, I know I did when I first started harvesting, like, I had a pretty consumer orientation, man over nature. I was raised in a Judeo-Christian culture myself. And it took a while before I understood myself as the protector of the ecosystem. even though that was my, I would say, ethical orientation, it wasn't an embodied experience. But what'll start to happen is, I just want to say, like, be less afraid in general. I find like being less afraid and being more experimental is really the best way to start to develop your relationship with plants and ecosystem. Find a local botanist, even if it means, just asking everybody, like, does anyone know anyone who's good at plant identification? Eventually you'll find someone. They might not be like an edible plants expert, but you're just looking for a plant expert. And then, you can, actually, Juliana brought this up, Juliana Wilson, in the Body Thrive call we did today with our members. She used to work a lot with toxicology and invasive weeds and county spraying. And you can call your county and find out where they're spraying, and you can find out what they're spraying. If they're spraying petrochemicals on invasive weeds, and you can find out the roots. They have to report on this stuff. So then you can go into other places. I also really recommend, like, see what's already growing in your yard. And if you're spraying Roundup or you're spraying any chemicals in your own soil, right? Because like it all starts at home. It takes about 3 years in general if you were to do nothing to that soil. But you can do things like, if you're into organic farming or know people in your community who are into organic farming, you can usually buy something called worm tea. And it's basically the poop that comes out of worms, like worms eat soil, right? So that it goes through the worm's body, the worm poops it out, and you make it into a tea, and you can spray that on any land that you've damaged or that you're inheriting. I've inherited a lot of damaged land in my life, and you can replenish that microbiome. And that only takes one season. You got your worm tea there, Brenda. Awesome. Yeah. Composting is also like part of that whole loop of like how to bring more nutrients into the soil. I often just look around. I know the more I studied invasives and started experimenting, is I just get really curious of like, who's popping up? Who's popping up around me? What can I learn from them? Why are they here? Who are they? And I really do think of plants as personalities. I think of them as friends. And then I get to know them, and they teach me so much. That might sound like totally woo-woo, but it's definitely my lived experience. And what I've noticed over time is I've had to be really firm about the no Roundup and no petrochemicals on our soil. I'm a busy CEO. I'm a mom. I also am an author. I do a lot, and I have people help me with gardening. Truth be told, every gardener I've ever worked with has wanted to spray Roundup on my property. And I've had to put my foot down and be like, I know it's not going to look perfect. I know it's going to be messy. I know the invasives are going to come in here. And I'll handle it when that happens. Like I'll see what they're trying to do once they're here. And that partnership has been, to me, it's really a cool experience. Yeah.
So, Cate, Sharon Berman has a question on chaga mushroom.
Yeah. So again, if like chaga's growing in your ecosystem, great. If you're importing it from China, to me, it's not as much part of this talk, because it's a cool superfood. It's a brain food. It does all these cool things, but like, it was hilarious. I was in we have a greenhouse, and I was in there yesterday. I was like, Winston, did you see the mushrooms? He's like, yeah. I'm like, do you know what they are? He's like, I have no idea. I'm like, I don't either. Right? Like, I don't even know who would know, but we do have a mushroom guy in our town, and I'll ask him about it. So again, like I would always go local. Like I'd always find out like what's already around you that's edible. I really honestly have lived the truth of there's superfoods everywhere. And the things that are labeled as superfoods that are in the grocery store that are imported from other countries are not your superfoods. Your superfoods are the invasive weeds that are growing outside your door. So get to know them, take care of your ecosystem. What'll happen is as you do that, it'll actually help the native ecosystem recover. The native ecosystem has a lot of nutrient density and different phytonutrient diversification. And as you bring that back in, like what happens is it just gets more diverse and more magical with time. Morels. Oh, that's so great. Morels by your house. Yeah, I'm kind of curious if I can grow morels in my greenhouse. hydration and absorption. So Susan's question on that. Yeah, like to me, Susan, that points straight, that your question itself points straight to plants like purslane. So I try to find out like, where's the purslane growing near you? Because that will add a lot of hydration. So plants that are high in moisture will add hydration to your body. Plants like dandelions that are low in moisture will take moisture away from your body. So like a plant that's like dandelion, that's a diuretic, is going to suck some moisture out of your body. Yeah. And I'd say like anyone who's interested more in like the body and energetics and 6 tastes and constitutions, our best course for you is the Living Ayurveda course. And just have a conversation with us. Go to, actually, when we have a free Ayurvedic training to see, like for you to see how interested you are. And that's at yogahealer.com/Ayurveda, AYURVEDA. Does chickweed hydrate? Yes. Anything that's going to be on the sweeter, moisture side will be hydrating. Yeah, it'll decrease vata. Any plant that decreases vata will be hydrating because vata is inherently super dry. Brianne's asking, if you don't have any real health concerns, how do you know what plants you should eat, how much and how often? You follow your intuition. So the more you develop your 6 tastes, and you taste plants, you'll notice like on certain days, you'll want more of something. On other days, you'll want less of something. So like same plant, but you get to know how to like become part of in what I call insourcing wisdom as opposed to outsourcing wisdom. So no one needs to tell, you don't need a nutritionist to figure out what to eat. You don't need an Ayurvedic practitioner to tell you what to eat, right? It's more understanding the 6 tastes, understanding the nature of nature, and following and developing intuition. In yoga philosophy, that's the Vijnanamaya Kosha. It's the wisdom that comes from reflecting on the self. In yogic wisdom, it's called svadhyaya. Sva means self and dhya means to study. So you start to study yourself. You start to study your palate patterns. You start to study where you're emotionally eating. You start to study what taste you're missing. And you start to study like, ooh, this plant is intense. It's strong. I don't like it. I better have more of it, right? To find out like what it's trying to teach me, to understand it, see if it detoxifies me. Because often we're coming to wild foods with a toxic palate. I hate to say it that way. It sounds really negative, but it's definitely my lived experience growing up on the standard American diet, you know, having like SpaghettiOs and pasta and bread and turkey sandwiches and, you know, just that kind of stuff. Like you're going to eat service berries. You're gonna be like, that tastes different. Yeah, that's wild. That's wild. And wild is full of the life force. Wild is adaptable. Wild is alive. Conventional, unfortunately, is dumbed down, and it's really easy to control, but it doesn't lead to the experience that you want.
Kate, Cordula was wanting to recall the other Ayurvedic word you used about 10 minutes ago.
Give me a hint.
I can't remember what it was. It was the word where we really know ourselves through being connected.
Yes. Svasta, did I use that one? Or was it svadhyaya?
Carolyn's got it. Niralamba.
Oh, Niralamba. Yeah. Yeah. So without support, it's this crazy paradox where you actually feel, it means without support, but what it really is the experience of is you are supported by everything. You're supported by everything. So you're no longer grabbing at straws. You're no longer like, I need to buy that thing on Amazon and then I'll feel fulfilled. Or I need like to eat a big, whatever, bag of popcorn and then I'll feel satiated and fulfilled. You're naturally already fulfilled. You're naturally already supported. And what I find with Ayurveda, like the plants are a really good bridge into higher levels of consciousness. And at higher levels of consciousness, you're fed directly by the elements. You're fed by the earth and the sky and the light or fire. You're fed by the water. You're fed by the movement of air. You're receiving constantly from the 5 elements. So you're always, it's the paradox of Niralamba, is you're actually always receiving support and connection. It's why, like, if you've been working too much at your desk or looking at a computer and you go for a walk outside and you don't listen to anything and you just look at the clouds or you just look at the horizon and you just simply receive from nature, you come back and you're like, gosh, I feel so much better. That's the experience of yeah, receiving directly. The more you're receiving directly, what I find is I become more of a gift to other people. I'm able to give it away. I give away whatever thrive I'm experiencing. It becomes that I'm able to actually support more people from the experience of directly receiving from the elements and directly receiving from the plants.
Okay, and I know that we're end of time, but I was just thinking it would be great to get onto the Yogahealer free group and for all of us to really participate. Yeah. Like I noticed there's some specific questions around different plants, and so I think it would be great to continue that discussion on the Yogahealer free group. I'll pop the link in the chat here so we can continue on there.
We can also put it in the follow-up emails and on the replay page too. So if you guys don't find it in here, and if you can just let Shane know on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Great. We'll send you guys, the slides will be on the replay page. I would say if you found this helpful and you're telling someone about it and they want to know more, you can send them also to the replay page. There's a lot of value in the slides, you know, just if you need it as a resource. There's so much good stuff on the web. There's so many more plant books I'm finding like every season, and people are getting much more connected to their ecosystem. So the more you're connecting with your farmers, your botanists, your plant specialists, your gardeners, I tell you, like there's just, you'll just get to know more and more, and you'll start to feel fed. You'll really feel fed from your environment. All right, cool. Are we good? Without further ado, yeah, party on. Take care of your plants. See ya and namaste.
Thanks everyone.